Some people make choices that ruin their lives, but never truly understand the consequences. My wife Francesca is one such person. Hello everyone and welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We have a fresh story, so let's get started. My name is Matthew. And if you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, you will understand what I went through. I always believed that my wife Francesca was my greatest supporter. Sadly, I was wrong. This is the story of how I discovered that my wife was having an affair with my boss. When I saw it with my own eyes for the first time, I knew my life would never be the same again. I've always believed in hard work. If you put in the time, effort, and sacrifice, you will eventually see the rewards. I worked at Sterling Enterprises, one of the top firms in our industry. While many of my colleagues would leave the office promptly at 5 p.m., I stayed late, making sure every report was perfect and every strategy foolproof. I wasn't just doing my job, I was setting the foundation for my future. And now it was finally paying off. It was the company's annual Sterling Enterprises dinner, a high-profile event, exclusive and formal, with a lot at stake. Promotions weren't just announced in emails. They were revealed in front of hundreds of executives, clients, and employees. If someone's name was called that night, it meant their hard work had been noticed, and they were on the path to something greater. I was in line for a big promotion. This wasn't just a new title. It came with a bigger salary, more opportunities, and real power within the company. That night was supposed to be a celebration, not only of my achievements but of us as a couple. If there was one thing I knew for sure, it was Francesca. My wife, my biggest cheerleader, my partner. We had been together for decades. In everything, she was not only my wife, but also the person who made me believe in myself, even when I doubted my abilities. I never questioned her loyalty. Not once. At least, that's what I thought. The night of the annual dinner arrived. The venue was exactly what you'd expect from a company like Sterling Enterprises: stylish, luxurious, and sophisticated. I was proud, not just of my career, but of the woman standing beside me. Francesca looked stunning. She always did, but tonight, she was especially breathtaking. We walked in, and I introduced her to my colleagues. As always, she said just the right things. She had a natural ability to make people feel at ease and make them smile. She captivated everyone, even the senior partners and the executives who rarely even acknowledged most employees. They were drawn to her, and I couldn't help but feel proud as I stood by her side, watching with admiration. This was my wife, my partner, the woman with whom I had built my life. But throughout the night, I began to notice something odd. Francesca seemed to be drawn to Gerald, my boss. He was a man with power, connections, and influence. Not only did he have the respect of the company, but he also had control over opportunities. He decided who would move up and who would be left behind. At first, I told myself it was nothing. She was simply being friendly, right? She was just making small talk, being polite. But deep down, my instincts told me otherwise. At one point, Gerald leaned in close to her ear and whispered something I couldn't hear. Francesca smiled, a smile she hadn't given all night. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. I felt like I was an outsider, witnessing something unfold that I didn't fully understand yet. And for the first time, a wave of anxiety began to settle in. A few hours later, Francesca curled up next to me, resting her hand on my arm. "I have to take this," she said, adjusting her phone slightly. I glanced at the screen. It showed no name, just a number. I nodded. "Sure, I'll be here." She smiled, squeezed my arm, and drifted off, disappearing into the sea of well-dressed executives and servers carrying trays of champagne. At first, I didn't think much of it. I listened to the discussions around me as my colleagues talked about market trends, upcoming projects, and the importance of closing deals. But then 20 minutes passed, and Francesca was still gone. I casually scanned the room, waiting for her to come back. Maybe tell me she was at the bar or talking to someone else. Nothing. 5 more minutes went by. I checked my phone, still no text from her. Maybe she went outside, where it was quieter. Maybe the call was just taking longer than expected to connect. I tried to refocus on my conversation, pushing the uneasy feeling that was starting to creep up my spine back into the back of my mind. But then 5 more minutes passed. 30 minutes had gone by since she left, and suddenly, I wasn't so sure anymore. I was snapped out of my thoughts when I felt someone nudge my arm. It was Eric, one of my coworkers. We weren't exactly close friends, but we'd worked together enough to get along. He leaned in slightly, swirling his whiskey in his glass, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "You're a patient man, bro. You know, if my wife was that close to my boss, I'd have questions." I let out a small laugh. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Eric took a slow sip from his drink and shrugged. "Come on, man, we all see it. She's been flirting with Gerald all evening." Laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, giving him those looks. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I smiled through gritted teeth and said, "My wife's just being friendly." By this point, the discomfort in my stomach had turned into full-blown suspicion. I glanced at my watch. It had been 35 minutes since Francesca stepped away to take her call. I started scanning the crowd, trying to spot her familiar figure among the executives, servers, and guests, but she wasn't anywhere. No matter where I looked, I couldn't find her. I checked the bar, hoping she'd run into an old friend. Nothing. I glanced toward the balcony, where some guests had stepped out to get fresh air. Empty. That's when it hit me. I hadn't seen Gerald in quite some time either. The pieces began to fall into place, and a cold realization crept up my spine. My heart started racing as I walked through the venue, picking up the pace with every step. The chatter around me became a blur. I wasn't even sure where I was going, just that my feet were moving, driven by an impulse that I desperately hoped was wrong. I turned down one of the quieter hallways, passing the restrooms. The only other sounds were the rustle of metallic doors and the hum of machinery. That's when I heard it, a dull murmur, voices faint through the thick doors. I slowed my steps, straining to hear, my mind already racing. Then I heard something else, a muffled moan. I took a step forward, then another. I stopped just inches from the restroom door, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. But I forced myself to call out, "Francesca!" Silence. I swallowed hard and steadied my voice. "Francesca, are you there?" Still nothing. Then I heard a faint rustling, the kind of sound people make when they're caught doing something they shouldn't be. The hesitation, the silence. It said everything. My patience snapped. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out my phone, ready to call security if I needed to. But before I could press the button, the door creaked open. Francesca stepped out first. Her hair was slightly messy, strands hanging over her flushed face. Her dress, which had fit perfectly earlier, was now wrinkled, as if someone had been tugging at it. Then just behind her was Gerald. His tie was loosened, and the top button of his shirt was undone. His face didn't show the panic I saw in Francesca's. It was tight, unreadable, like he was assessing how bad the situation really was. We froze for a moment, the three of us. None of us said a word, but we didn't need to. The truth wasn't hiding. It was right in front of me. I felt nothing. No rage, no immediate outburst. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera, and pressed record. Today is the annual dinner for Sterling Enterprises. This is my wife, Francesca, and my boss, Gerald. I just caught them in a restroom together, making out. Gerald stiffened. Francesca gasped and moved closer to me, her voice trembling. "Matthew, please." I raised my hand, cutting her off. I didn't need excuses. I didn't need an explanation. I kept the camera on them a little longer than necessary, letting their perfect little lie fall apart in front of the lens. Without saying another word, I stopped the recording and walked away. I didn't say anything to either of them. There was nothing left to say, nothing to fix. I didn't need an explanation from Francesca, or a shallow apology from Gerald. I walked out, leaving her behind, and drove home alone. I no longer cared about the promotion. As I drove, my phone vibrated against the passenger seat. A text. A missed call. Another. I didn't even look at them. I didn't want to hear her voice. An hour later, the front door squeaked open. Francesca walked in, her face stained with tears, her makeup ruined. She looked like she had cried the entire way home. But honestly, I didn't care. At first, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, searching my face for any hint of reassurance, hoping for some explanation, some way to make things right. Matthew, she started. I raised my hand, stopping her before she could say more. Don't, I said, and that was all. I didn't want to hear her justification. I didn't want to know how sorry she was. Things had changed the minute I caught them. The rest of the night was quiet. No shouting, no arguing, just silence. We didn't speak another word. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV, though I wasn't really watching. She stood silently by the door, her body language pleading for me to say something. But I couldn't and I wouldn't. By the time I went to bed, the texts and calls had piled up. Somehow, my colleagues already knew what happened. They were eager to ask why I had left early, what had gone wrong. I ignored them. I didn't want to deal with the gossip, the whispers behind my back. I didn't need it from anyone. I woke up the next morning, convinced I was done. Francesca was somewhere in the house, probably sitting in silence, waiting for me to say something, hoping to believe there was something left to salvage. But there wasn't. I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. A minute later, she was there at the table, her hands gripping a coffee mug that had long gone cold. As soon as I walked in, she looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen from crying all night. Matthew, please, she said, her voice breaking, desperate, pleading that I sat down across from her, my face unreadable. I didn't speak right away. I didn't offer any sign of sympathy. I wasn't there to comfort her. I was there to end this. Our marriage is over, I said. The words were calm, firm, and final. I was done with being angry. There was no point in screaming or blaming. But by then the damage was done. Francesca flinched, as if I had struck her. No, Matthew, please, it was a mistake, she pleaded. I know it was, I replied. But we can't get through this. I love you. I snorted and shook my head. You love me? I scoffed. Was it just Gerald, or is there another? She didn't answer. She didn't even try. And that silence, that hesitation, was all the confirmation I needed. I exhaled deeply, then pushed my chair back and stood up. Your time in this home ends with the divorce, I said, my tone unwavering. We're done. She slowly started to cry, eventually breaking down into choking sobs, her body convulsing as her mind replayed everything she had done. I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the weight of her betrayal. Word spreads quickly among the corporate elite. But a scandal like this? It spreads like wildfire. At first, it was just whispers, colleagues exchanging knowing looks. I ignored it. I had no interest in becoming part of the office gossip mill. By Monday morning, the company's higher-ups were fully informed of what had happened at the annual dinner. Gerald being caught messing around with an employee's wife wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was a professional catastrophe. We were a company that prided itself on integrity and leadership. And Gerald's actions didn't just cross the line. They obliterated it. The scandal sparked an internal investigation. And as they dug deeper, they uncovered something that didn't surprise me at all. Gerald had a history of infidelities at work. Francesca wasn't the first. It turned out he had used his position to proposition women, dangling power over them to get them into bed. Some of those relationships were consensual, while others were a gray area. Coercion disguised as mentorship. HR had overlooked it in the past, but now they had evidence, witnesses, and a scandal too big to ignore. By the end of the week, Gerald was placed on leave. A week later, he was fired. Just like that, his career, his entire reputation was ruined. The boss who had been so strong and untouchable, the one who controlled the future of others, had his own future destroyed. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't even care. By the time Gerald's downfall was over, I had already moved on. On the other hand, Francesca still didn't get it. Even after everything settled, after everything fell apart, she still looked at me with those same desperate, confused eyes, as if she couldn't understand why it had all unraveled. Some people destroy their lives and never truly understand how or why they did it. She was one of them. And honestly, that was no longer my problem. Weeks went by after we broke up. My life began to feel normal again. Work was steady, my routine was back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself. Then one night my phone buzzed. A single message. I miss you. Can we talk? I stared at the screen as the words sank in. I read them, then deleted them. And I moved on. No response. No closure. No conversation. She made her choices, and I made mine. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have given her a second chance? Would you have stayed and tried to fix things? Or would you have done what I did, walked away? No second chances. No explanations. The truth is, some betrayals can never be forgiven. Many people only realize what they lost when it's too late. And by then, you won't even care anymore.